Imagine a land, a slender strip only about 150 miles long and 24 to 30 miles wide, nestled between the sparkling Syrian Sea and the towering peaks of the Lebanon mountains. This is Phoenicia. Its landscape is a series of narrow valleys and ravines, bordered by abrupt hills that tumble down toward the sea. In the early spring, little torrents formed by melting snow or rainstorms rush through these valleys, but by summer, only the wells and cisterns hold any water. The mountains here were always lush with trees. At their highest points stood the famous cedars of Lebanon. Lower down, the ridges were covered with pines and cypresses, and even lower, palm trees grew all the way to the seashore. In the fertile valleys you could find olives, vines, figs, and pomegranates flourishing. Scattered along the rocky coast were natural harbors created by promontories or islands, and it was here that the Phoenicians built their cities. Tyre and Arad were perched on small islands, their inhabitants living in tall buildings, 6 to 8 stories high, and bringing fresh water over by ship. Other cities like Gabel, Beirut, and Sidon rose on the mainland. Since the soil couldn't support the population, the Phoenicians turned to the sea, becoming expert seamen and traders. Sadly, no books from the Phoenicians have survived, not even their sacred texts. The sites of their cities have been excavated, but as one scholar noted, ruins are not preserved, especially in countries where people are not occupied with them. The Syrians, preoccupied with other matters, did not preserve these ancient sites. They plundered tombs for jewels, dismantled buildings for stone, and destroyed sculptures due to religious beliefs. What remains are fragments, broken marble, rock-cut cisterns, wine presses, and a few rock-hewn sarcophagi. These remnants tell us little, leaving us to rely on Greek writers and Jewish prophets for much of what we know about the Phoenicians. Politically, the Phoenicians never unified into a single empire. Each city governed itself with its own king, assemblies, and local government. For broader matters, they sent delegates to Tyre, which became Phoenicia's leading city around the 13th century BC. Not being a military power, the Phoenicians often found themselves under the control of stronger empires like the Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians, to whom they paid tribute. By the 13th century, Tyre stood out as the most prominent Phoenician city. Its island location eventually became too small, prompting the construction of a new city on the adjacent coast. Tyrian merchants were adventurous, founding colonies throughout the Mediterranean, importing silver from Spain, and trading goods from across the ancient world. The Bible's prophet Isaiah called these traders princes, while Ezekiel detailed the caravans arriving from all directions. One of Tyre's kings, Hiram, provided craftsmen to King Solomon for building his palace and temple in Jerusalem. In the 9th century, some Tyrians, fleeing a revolution, founded Carthage on the African coast near modern-day Tunis. This new city, led by a woman named Elizar, known as Dido, quickly rose to power. Legend says the locals agreed to sell her only as much land as could be covered by a bull's hide. Cleverly, she cut the hide into thin strips, enclosing a vast territory where she built a formidable citadel. Carthage, with its strategic location in twin harbors, flourished. It established colonies, conquered lands, and eventually dominated the coasts of Africa, Spain, and Sardinia. Carthage became a commercial powerhouse, with trade outposts everywhere and subjects who paid tribute. To protect their vast colonies and keep potential rebels in check, Carthage needed a formidable army. However, the life of a Carthaginian was deemed too precious to risk in battle unless absolutely necessary. Instead, Carthage relied heavily on mercenaries, hiring soldiers from the various tribes and regions within their empire and beyond. This army was a unique and colorful mix, with soldiers speaking different languages, practicing various religions, and donning diverse weapons and attire. You'd find Numidians, dressed in lion skins, and riding small, swift horses without saddles, expertly shooting arrows while galloping at full speed. Libyans with their dark skin wielded pikes, while Iberians from Spain wore white garments with red trimmings and carried long, pointed swords. Gauls fought nearly naked, equipped with massive shields and hefty swords they wielded with both hands. From the Balearic Islands came natives trained from childhood to sling stones or lead balls with deadly accuracy. Carthaginian generals led these troops, though their own government kept a close watch on them. If they failed in battle, they faced the brutal punishment of crucifixion. And Carthage was officially ruled by 2 kings, but the real power lay with the Senate, composed of the city's wealthiest merchants. Thus, every political decision was deeply influenced by commercial interests. Other peoples often despised the Carthaginians, seeing them as cruel, greedy, and untrustworthy. Yet, with their strong navy, wealth to hire soldiers, and a vigorous government, they managed to maintain control over the western Mediterranean for 300 years, from the 6th to the 3rd century BC. And the Phoenicians and Carthaginians practiced a religion similar to that of the Chaldeans. Their chief deity, Bel, was a sun god, while the moon also held great significance. Each Phoenician city had its divine pair. In Sidon, it was Baal Sidon, means sun, and Estoreth, means moon. In Gabal, Baal Tammuz and Baaleth, and in Carthage, Baal Ammon and Tanith. These gods had different names depending on their roles as creators or destroyers. For instance, in Carthage, Baal as the destroyer was known as Moloch. These gods were worshipped with idols, temples, altars, and priests. As creators, they were honored with lively feasts and orgies. As destroyers, they demanded human sacrifices. Astoreth, the great goddess of Sidon, was symbolized by the crescent moon and a dove, and her worship involved sacred groves. Baal Moloch was depicted in Carthage as a bronze giant with outstretched arms, into which children were placed, falling into a pit of fire below. During the siege of Carthage by Agathocles, leading citizens sacrificed up to 200 of their own children to Moloch. This religion, both sensual and bloody, horrified other peoples, yet many imitated it. The Jews offered sacrifices to Baal on mountaintops, while the Greeks worshipped Astarte of Sidon as Aphrodite and Baal Melkart of Tyre as Heracles. And crowded into their small territory, the Phoenicians turned to trade to make a living. Unlike other ancient peoples, the Egyptians, Chaldeans, Assyrians, or even the barbarian tribes of the West like the Spaniards, Gauls, and Italians, the Phoenicians were the only ones daring enough to sail the seas. They became the world's first great merchants, buying and selling goods from every corner of the known world. Their trade routes spanned the east by land and the west by sea. On land, Phoenician caravans ventured in 3 main directions. Towards Arabia, they brought back gold, agate, onyx, incense, myrrh, perfumes, pearls, spices, ivory, ebony, ostrich feathers, and even apes from India. Towards Assyria, they imported cotton, linen, asphalt, precious stones, perfumery, and silk from China. And towards the Black Sea, they traded for horses, slaves, and copper vases crafted by the mountaineers of the Caucasus. For their sea trade, the Phoenicians built ships from the cedars of Lebanon, using both oars and sails for propulsion. They didn't just stick close to the shore, they were skilled navigators who steered by the polar star. These brave sailors ventured to the mouth of the Mediterranean, through the Strait of Gibraltar, known as the Pillars of Hercules, and even beyond to the coasts of England and possibly Norway. In the 7th century BC, Phoenician sailors, serving an Egyptian king, circumnavigated Africa, returning 3 years later via the Red Sea. An expedition from Carthage, led by Hanno, sailed along Africa's coast to the Gulf of Guinea, and he wrote about this journey in a record that survives to this day. The Phoenicians traded goods from their own industries to more civilized peoples. In less developed regions, they sought resources that couldn't be found in the East. For instance, they collected shellfish from the Greek coast to produce a red dye known as Tyrian purple, which was prized for royal and noble garments. From Spain and Sardinia, they brought back silver extracted from local mines. Tin, essential for making bronze, was sourced from the coasts of England in the Isles of Tin. The Phoenicians also traded in slaves, buying them like the slave traders of later centuries, or sometimes capturing them during raids. Their fleets were not above piracy, plundering coastal settlements for slaves and loot. The Phoenicians were secretive about their trade routes to avoid competition. They kept the locations of places like the Isles of Tin a mystery. A Greek ship stumbled upon Spain by accident, discovering a land the Phoenicians had traded with for centuries. Carthaginians were so protective of their routes that they drowned foreign merchants found in Sardinia or near Gibraltar. In one instance, a Carthaginian captain ran his ship aground to prevent a pursuing ship from learning his course. Wherever they traded, the Phoenicians established fortified trading posts on natural harbors. These, factories or branch houses, were where they unloaded goods like cloths, pottery, ornaments, and idols. The locals would bring their own goods to trade, much like modern European merchants did with African tribes. These posts often grew into towns, with natives building around them and adopting Phoenician gods. Even after some of these towns became Greek cities, the influence of Phoenician culture remained strong, with the worship of their gods like the dove goddess in Cythera or the bull-faced god in Crete. The Phoenicians, driven by their commercial interests, inadvertently spread civilization. Western barbarians learned to imitate the more advanced Eastern goods brought by Phoenicians. Greeks, for instance, initially had only Phoenician-made vases, jewels, and idols as models. The Phoenicians brought industry and commodities from Egypt and Assyria to distant lands. One of their most enduring legacies is the alphabet. The Phoenicians didn't invent writing. The Egyptians had been writing for centuries using a mix of syllabic signs and ideographs. But the Phoenicians needed a simpler system for their trade records. They streamlined writing to 22 letters, each representing a sound. This alphabet spread, influencing Hebrew, Lycian, Greek, Italian, Etruscan, Iberian, and even Norse runes. Essentially, the Phoenicians taught the world how to write. That's the fascinating tale of the Phoenicians, pioneers of ancient trade and civilization.